Welcome Malcolm from the Light Cellar. Malcolm and I have known each other for a pretty long time. We went to nutrition school together, and I am so grateful that I have Malcolm in my life and that we're connected, because I think he's an amazing gift to the optimal health community. So welcome, Malcolm. We're happy to have you on my IG Live.
Well, thanks so much. Yeah, stoked to be here and excited to talk chocolate with you. I know you're streaming from the land of chocolate right now, aren't you?
Yep, I'm in Mexico, so I know all about real raw cacao and where it comes from and what it actually tastes like, how it's super bitter and it doesn't taste anything like chocolate. So I would love to kind of get started and know. Well, actually, I wanted to share you my quick experience with St. Lucia. When I went to St. Lucia for my 40th birthday, I was able to stay in a cacao plantation for 3 days, and it was mind-blowing. I got to see the whole process of how chocolate came to be in my belly, and I had no idea that it was such a huge process, kind of like vanilla beans, and that's actually something I'd love for you to talk about, like the actual process of raw cacao and how it comes to our tables, and so that people can start appreciate what it really is about and have a little more respect for it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's what I'd love to dive into that.
Please, where does it start? The fact that I don't even think people understand that it comes from a pod, or what the pod looks like, or that it doesn't taste anything like chocolate, and you would never guess that those beans inside that pod ends up turning to chocolate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. Well, that's why I wrote the book on it. So here we are. Here's a picture of cacao pods. So botanically, it's interesting because it's a very unique tree. What you can see there are the pods growing off the trunk of the tree, and there's a botanical term for it called califery. Like most fruits, they're out on the branches, right? You're picking your peaches, your apples, this kinds of things out on the branches, whereas the cacao pods actually grow from the trunk of the tree. And it all starts as a tiny little flower, very, very small, looks like a little bit of an orchid. And in fact, there's only one insect that is responsible for pollinating the cacao flower, therefore bringing us these chocolate fruits, which bring us the cacao beans, which we're going to get into. In fact, taking some of these pictures, it was one of these beautiful, beautiful evenings, twilight, the sun was just going down. It was like, as a photographer, it was like, this is the light. This is just perfect. And so like you, I was staying in an area, a cacao plantation, and just took advantage of that moment to go out and photograph the trees or the pods in all their kind of beautiful glory. And, it's the tropics, because cacao grows in what's known as the cocoa belt, which is 20 degrees north of the equator and 20 degrees south. It's a very narrow band in the world where chocolate grows. Those are only the right conditions where it grows. So, of course, it was nice. It was warm out. It was about 6 o'clock. Sun was going down, and I just had my shorts on, bare feet, walking through the grasses and taking photos. And all of a sudden, like my ankles were like, a little kind of itchy, scratchy. Like I was getting bites, and that time of light was a narrow window. So, I finished up, I kind of bared through the insect bites because I knew it wasn't going to be that long. And I come back inside, and then the itching started to happen and the swelling started to happen. And for the next 3 days, I could literally barely walk. I was in so much pain. And it turns out, these little critters had just kind of munched at my ankles. It caused an incredible reaction of swelling. And I was cursing these little bugs. I was like, like I was in so much pain. And my wife was like, wait a minute here, we need perspective. Yes, I know these little bugs gave you little bites, and you're in pain right now, but without them, you would not have chocolate. So we renamed them the joy fly. And if anybody's ever heard of a no-see-um, they're so small you don't see them, but they're there. They can bite, and that is the insect that pollinates cacao, the joy fly. It's able to kind of get right in there into those little flowers and pollinate, and then from there we get these beautiful, beautiful pods. It kind of looks like the size, the shape, consistency of a squash, right? Like an acorn squash. It's got that firm, pod, and then we cut that open, and then that is where the goodness is at. So I'm gonna show another little picture here.
Hey, Malcolm, when I read that in the book, that was such a great part of the book, and just knowing how you appreciated that little fly that gave you so much pain afterwards.
For sure. Yeah, because there they are. That's what they produce. So you slice that open.
Those are cacao beans in that when it opens up.
That's right. Yeah. So covered in, it's actually technically described as a mucilage. So it's this, juicy, watery, sweet like fruit that covers every single cacao bean in the pod. And depending on the variety, depending on the size of the pod, there's anywhere from 30 to 50 cacao beans in a cacao pod covered in the sweet, delicious fruit. And it's the beans that create cacao. And which we then turn into chocolate. So the first step after harvesting is then it goes to fermentation. So did you know chocolate is actually a fermented food? Amazing.
Yeah, I don't think many people know that, Malcolm. So I think that's really something to touch upon a little further too.
Yeah, totally. So cacao goes through fermentation, and you might think, well, why do we ferment? And you, Christina, with your nutrition background, anybody that has studied nutrition, studied fermentation knows that it's a very key process in making, especially nuts and seeds, more digestible. So there's certain anti-nutrients, things like phytic acid, tannins, so on and so forth, that, they're essentially protective mechanisms for the plant to keep the nutrients in the seed until things are ready, so they don't get overeaten, get over harvested, because the whole purpose of the seed is to create new life, to create new plants. And humans discovered through their ingenuity that soaking, sprouting, fermenting, and roasting were all ways to deal with some of these anti-nutrients, to take these nuts and seeds, grains, that type of thing, and make them more digestible. So cacao is absolutely plays a role where it is fermented to make it more digestible. The other thing that it does is it helps develop the flavor as well. So, when we depending on how deep we get into this in conversation, having explored this whole process from what we call bean to bar, what creates chocolate, there's several different factors that influence the flavor, right? You mentioned when you taste a cacao bean, it tastes nothing like chocolate. So there's multiple steps along the way to get us to that end flavor. And fermentation is a huge part. And it's one of the kind of final frontiers in terms of exploring and developing flavor. So I was at a plantation in Ecuador where they had over 70 different varieties of cacao growing just in this one area. And one of the things that they specialized in, not only the different varieties, but then you could actually customize the fermentation. So depending on how long the fermentation goes or how many hours before you kind of turn and toss it, because the cacao, this kind of mass of fruit and beans, sitting, fermenting, needs to be turned over to kind of keep oxygen and, the right types of bacteria fermenting. So you can even influence the flavor during that fermentation process. You can add different fruits or herbs to the fermentation, and that would influence the flavor. It was unbelievable. So it was one of the first few places that has really dialed right into the fermentation process to explore different flavor profiles.
I love that. Okay, so after the beans come out of the pod, and I guess they clean off that usually like that pith part.
No, they don't actually.
Oh, Okay.
Yeah, so what happens is the whole thing, it's called the baba, you know, and it's the fruit covering those beans. It's just actually literally dumped into piles or into boxes, and it's the fruit that ferments, and it ferments the beans within itself. So a lot of that juice ends up just kind of, you know, dripping off. And this is interesting that, you know, if you go to places like Brazil, culturally, they love the cacao fruit, and you can get cacao fruit juice on the streets, and, you know, it's enjoyed as a wonderful, incredible beverage. And some cultures actually fermented that juice into alcohol. And actually downstairs, just more of as kind of like a little token, I've got actually a cacao spirit. So where they've actually distilled from the cacao fruit and turned it into essentially like a vodka.
Wow, amazing. Okay, so then after it's fermented, then is it dried?
Then it's dried, yeah. And again, here's another step of the process where it's very key in terms of how it's handled and how it's dried, because it influences the flavor. If you really quickly dry it, you capture a lot of the kind of acidic flavors that have just happened through fermentation. So cacao needs to get to a certain moisture percentage to be considered, you know, perfectly dried and, you know, stable, but you can't quickly dry it. You need to slowly dry it, which allows some of those volatile acids to kind of, you know, evaporate off and create a more balanced flavor at the end.
Interesting. And it's also, I guess, that's a critical part in preventing mold or having mold be created, no?
Yeah.
For a while, I'm very aware of mold and mycotoxins in the body for health and preventing Alzheimer's and all of that. And for a while, once I learned that many cacao beans and cacao powder, if it's not handled properly, it can contain a lot of mycotoxins and mold. So that was something. So then I stopped eating chocolate all of a sudden for a while until I figured out like good sources and knowing, you know, are there companies or, you know, how do you even know if it's moldy or not?
Yeah, no, it's true. So most cacao beans, you're absolutely right, contain molds like mycotoxins because of the fermentation and then the drying process, and just generally how it's handled. A lot of cacao is grown kind of small scale farms where they don't necessarily have the know-how or the awareness, let alone the infrastructure to properly do each of these steps. It's just done, you know, banana leaves on the ground, you know, piles of fermentation in the jungle floor. So we work with a company based out of Ecuador that, you know, does the proper fermentation and then also the drying, and then they make sure that there are no mycotoxins. So when we first started importing chocolate into Canada, like the CFIA, who are kind of the food regulatory body of Canada, you know, cacao is a contaminated food, raw cacao beans. And so we, in order to work with them, just as we were bringing them in, we had to have certificates analysis saying, you know, okay, what's the E. coli count? What's the salmonella count? And make sure that they were under certain levels. Now, it didn't matter if we were just going to roast them, because that's how a lot of mycotoxins are dealt with. Well, I should clarify how a lot of, like, you know, live bacteria are dealt with is, well, we just throw them into the roasters and no problem. It's our kill step. But as you know, that doesn't necessarily take care of the mycotoxins themselves. Just because they're dead, you know, doesn't mean that they can't still affect the body. So you actually don't want those at all. So I've had, you know, grade A commodity cacao sent to me that's just like, you know, visually it's quite unappealing because you can see the molds on it. So, you know, one needs to be very careful in terms of sourcing and handling.
Interesting. So you at the Light Cellar get the cacao beans, like raw cacao beans, and you roast them yourself. So, wow, that's amazing. I don't think many people do that, do they? And then you turn it into chocolate.
That's right. Yeah. So we do both. So we actually roast and we don't roast. Most chocolate on the market is roasted, partly because of, you know, dealing with the kind of microbial contamination. But then also it's a key step in developing flavor. When you roast, you know, just like coffee. I remember visiting a coffee aficionado who, he lived in Ecuador, so he was able to source all these different types of beans. And he served us a coffee that literally tasted like strawberries.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was because it was a particular type of bean that he did an incredibly light roast on, because the darker the roast, the more kind of deep, earthy flavors you're going to get, and then the light roast helps you maintain some of those kind of lighter, more fruity, aromatic type flavors. And cacao is very similar. So depending on roasting or not, and any kind of degree in between, you can really influence the flavor. So we do some roasting of cacao to pull out different flavors, but the majority of what we do is we actually don't roast. So it would be described as raw or unroasted, and it has its own flavor profile that way.
And so you turn that raw cacao. Maybe we should even differentiate like cacao versus cocoa for some people that don't even know the difference. Because maybe people are like, what does cacao mean? And why are they talking about that versus chocolate? And maybe we should go back a little bit. I'm just so excited to know everything about it. But have a little bit of an explanation of what the difference even is of cacao versus cocoa when we go to a grocery store and, that first.
Yeah, totally. So cacao, CACAO, is the original, word to describe what we're talking about, the whole food source of chocolate. And even within kind of the modern industry, anything that, is to do with the tree, the fruit, the beans in their kind of raw state, and then so that's what's described as cacao. And it even relates back to the Latin name, which is Theobroma cacao, which translates to food of the gods. Now, as soon as there's, the first bit of processing, from fermentation and definitely into roasting, then the conventional industry then describes it as cocoa. And we have cocoa beans, which are the processed form of it, either, again, from fermenting to roasting, milling, on and on and on. So we have that key distinction.
Okay. So, as a nutritionist, and, personal chef cooking for people, I always encourage people when I have a recipe, I say, and in your book, you have so many recipes, and most of them it's cacao powder, not cocoa powder. So even when people make hot chocolate, I say use raw cacao powder, not cocoa powder. And so why do we want to do that?
Yeah, really good question. So it does get into a little bit of semantics in terms of the name. There's people like myself who want to maintain the use of the word cacao just to create that distinction. So even though it has been processed, and we'll talk about some key distinctions in the processing, to us, it represents more that natural whole food, because everything that we've ever heard about chocolate, right? All the health benefits, which we're going to talk about today, is that in the cacao bean or is it in the Hershey's bar? Obviously it's in the cacao bean, it's in the whole food. And so the goal is, right, if that's where all the nutrition is, how can we get as close to the cacao bean, as possible to maintain that nutrition, but still in forms that we all know, love, and enjoy, be it chocolate bars, be it, cacao powder for hot drinks and cocos and that type of thing. So another key distinction here is, you've heard that term Dutch processed?
Yes, please explain that.
Yeah, so this Dutch processing, go figure, it was invented by a Dutchman, hence the name, the term. And it was the process of adding alkalizing agents to the cacao. So we've talked about how cacao goes through this fermentation process, and then typically it's roasted, and so on and so forth. The alkalizing process, the Dutch processing, is adding alkalizing agents that does a number of things. It helps de-acidify the flavor. So it helps it, taste less acidic, more alkaline. And I don't want to confuse people in terms of like, oh, well, acid is bad and alkaline is good. I mean, let's throw that out the window. There's absolutely no such thing when it comes to food and nutrition that, acid is bad and alkaline is good. This is just a process that, it's alkalizing the powder, so it makes it taste less acidic. It also helps reduce the bitterness. One of the things that we know about the darker the chocolate, the more bitter it is. Well, what do we also know about bitter? Bitter is medicine, right? So these heart healthy compounds, these flavanols, these antioxidants.
Our liver loves bitter.
Yeah, absolutely. So bitter is something that we want more of in our diet, get our palate more used to. But anyways, the alkalizing process helps de-bitter the chocolate. It also turns the color of the powder darker and just gives it like a richer flavor. Now, all that being said, what's wrong with that? Well, it turns out that you actually reduce the amount of nutrition. We mentioned that a little bit in just in terms of bitter medicine in terms of the flavor, but let me give you some actual real numbers of what that is doing. So when they add the alkaline powders, I've just got to find this here, page 24 on the book, or 25 it is actually. So there's natural cacao powders, cocoa powders. They can have a range of these flavanols, right? These heart healthy compounds, things that are good for our brain, good for our cardiovascular system. They range anywhere from 22.86 to 40.25 milligrams per gram. And I just want to insert here, why would there be such a range? Why would there be a range of 22 to 40, right, of these different cocoa powders? Well, it comes down to genetics. And for those of us that are, into nutrition or even just into flavor, right? We're always looking for those heirloom genetics. It's why we go to the farmer's market. It's why we're looking for those funky tomatoes, the different colors, like the flavor versus, the hybridized varieties that don't have that, right? So just within that, you can tell there's a spectrum of nutrition. So genetics plays a role, and then also terroir or how is grown. That can also influence it. So, anyways, just natural. If literally, and how they create cacao powder is they take the bean and then they'll press it. So it's contains anywhere from 40 to 50% oil or fat content. So it's quite a high oil-bearing nut or seed. And like any nut or seed, when we want those oils, we can press it and we can extract out the oil, and we get what's called cacao butter or cocoa butter, which is a whole other topic we can get into.
Question.
Yeah.
Cacao butter, that white, beautiful deliciousness right there.
Yeah.
Is that what white chocolate is made out of?
It's what white chocolate should be made out of. It's like the original white chocolate in that sense, where it's just the oil, just the fat of the cacao bean. Now, most white chocolate will have milk, sugar, and then oftentimes what's happened in the kind of the candy industry is cacao butter or cocoa butter is an expensive ingredient. In fact, most of it is sold to the cosmetic industry. And then the candy industry uses, fake, synthetic, lower quality oils and fats. Some things that you probably can't even pronounce. But anytime you look up, ingredients on the back of a chocolate bar, it should have cocoa butter in it. But those lower quality ones, the candy bars, they've even substituted that. So you've got like palm kernel oil, and you've got other synthetic ingredients just to kind of cheapen it, right? To help with the cost.
Okay, so just to quickly go back to cacao powder versus cocoa powder, the reason why we want to choose raw cacao powder versus cocoa powder, double Dutch process or Dutch process, because raw cacao powder still retains its nutrients, its wholesomeness, its synergy of everything that you're wanting to get out of that whole food, right?
Yeah, exactly. So let's dive into those numbers. So natural cacao powders, again, they've just been pressed, oil removed, and you're left over with a cake or a powder. That's what we call the cocoa powder. It's defatted cacao. Now, when it's lightly alkali processed, we go from 23 to 40 of these flavanols. It drops it from 8 to 24. into that range. So it really brings it down. Medium alkali treated powders go from 23 and 41 to 4 and 14. And then heavily treated alkali powders drops it down to 1.3 to 6 milligrams per gram of total flavanols. So you're really actually almost removing all those compounds altogether. So we can't necessarily say, oh, I've got this nice dark, cocoa powder, but if it's been Dutched, again, those flavanols have been removed.
Wow, interesting. We got into the nutrition profile a little bit of raw cacao beans. Let's even go back. So I don't know if any of you have never tasted a raw cacao bean or a roasted cacao bean or nibs, but if you haven't and you live in Calgary, I'd highly recommend go to the Light Cellar immediately after this IG Live and go talk to Malcolm or his staff and ask about raw cacao beans or the nibs, because it's such an interesting flavor, and I think people will have much more appreciation for it after they've tried it. And if you do want the nutritional potent benefits, that is what you would want to be eating, right? The raw cacao bean, even versus the raw cacao powder, which I didn't realize there was such a difference in nutrition profile.
Yeah, and again, we still all want to enjoy, the things that we know and love about chocolate. So it's about that gradient, right? How can we get as close as we can to the real whole food with the least amount of kind of processing? And, that's ultimately what this book is about is, short of just eating cacao beans, which ain't nothing wrong with that. How can you still make those delicious, bars and sauces and fudges and all that, just using the highest quality ingredients? And chocolate, is it not true that it is the greatest delivery system for other superfoods and herbs? So that's one of the main points.
Talk about this because the synergy of food is always something I'm wanting to share with people and get people to really understand why whole foods is such an important thing and the synergy of it all. And you talk about that in your book so brilliantly, and it really gets people thinking. So please do talk about the synergy of food and how important it is.
Yeah, totally. Well, how I kind of frame it is I talk about, it's alchemy is literally what it is. And, don't let that term intimidate you. Don't make it something more mystical than it is. We are all alchemists. For sure. Right? We might have been doing it in cauldrons and pots for a long time, but in our modern day, we're doing it in our blenders. And so I talk about this for alchemy, for flavor, function, and feeling. And flavor is the most obvious. If I say chocolate cherries, chocolate raspberries, chocolate hazelnuts, it just instantly you just know, okay, that's a good combination. The mouth waters. If I say chocolate spinach, chocolate garlic, it's just no, the flavor isn't quite there. So it's a very intuitive process, and we got to follow and be inspired by our palates. And so when we're creating with these alchemical combinations, we can come at it from flavor, from function, from feeling. And we know the term function from this idea of, functional nutrition, that we're actually, there's something to our food beyond, it's quick, it's easy, and it tastes good. You are a functional nutritionist, right? And many people have that as a part of their everyday. So what is the function, right? Of instead of, I'm just eating it, I'm just going to make a chocolate bar to, eat and have it taste good, you can actually get a lot more kind of intelligent in your design. So it could be the chocolate multivitamin. It could be the ultimate antioxidant bar. Chocolate is the food that contains one of the highest amounts of antioxidants. And we put a little chart in here in terms of the different types of foods, their antioxidant levels, and then chocolate is right at the bottom, and it contains the highest amount. So something like blueberries, we know of, it's pretty good, decent in antioxidants. That rate's 34 on the antioxidant scale. And quite interestingly, wild blueberries, and this relates back to the idea of the genetics that I talked about, right? Wild genetics, they've got they're stronger, right? They're more potent in terms of everything, and most especially nutrition. So a regular conventional blueberry would be 34, whereas wild blueberries are 61. Goji berries, 133, acai, 185, bee pollen, 287, cacao nibs, 621 in terms of antioxidants. And in fact, the cacao powder, 955. And the only reason there is, again, because it's been defatted. So it's actually just more concentrated per gram in antioxidants. Now, if we take cacao nib 621, we combine it with goji berries 133 or bee pollen 287. It's not like they cancel each other out. Again, there's that synergy, and so you can create the ultimate antioxidant bar. Chocolate contains many different minerals, including magnesium. It's one of the highest containing foods of magnesium. Chromium, zinc, iron, manganese, a nice full spectrum of minerals, and you can begin to kind of complement with other foods. So what's another mineral that goes well with magnesium?
Calcium.
Yeah, so how about create a little CalMag chocolate, right? So some foods that are high in calcium can be combined with a synergy to cacao. So something like mesquite or carob, or even a little bit of sea vegetables, or certain nuts that are high in calcium for that kind of CalMag synergy. So you can.
Is it true, in your perspective, that if you do crave chocolate, for many people it can be because you are low in magnesium, and really it's just that intuitiveness of, oh, chocolate or cacao has a large source of magnesium, so you're kind of like attracted to that chocolate to give you that source of magnesium.
For sure, I 100% believe that, and I think it's the reason why women, especially that time of the month, right, reach for chocolate. Also those flavanols, and the theobromine, there's many other compounds. One of the ancient words for cacao translates to heart blood. They knew that there was nutrients in there that was so closely correlated to the heart and to blood flow. Things like increasing nitric oxide in the body, which, opens up and relaxes the blood vessels, so there's more blood flow. So if someone is feeling like that stuckness, that stagnation, that can help increase blood flow. And for sure, there's always going to be that emotional component, and it might be literally someone's just kind of craving the sugar and just wanting that lift. But chocolate is so much more than that, especially the dark chocolate. We get into things like anandamide, which is known as the bliss molecule, or the PEA, the phenethylamines, which is the love molecule. We know that chocolate increases our neurotransmitters like serotonin. So it's just kind of a natural antidepressant, and helps just lift us up. And one of the interesting things about chocolate is that you never create a dependence or a tolerance to chocolate. And what I mean by that is it only ever takes that one bite, right? It's like, you get that craving for chocolate. You're like, I could have some chocolate. And it's not like, oh, I'm up to a bar now. I got to like, just to feel the effects of chocolate. No, it's like, one little piece. I'm not saying you'll have just one little piece, but one little piece does it.
When it's good quality, awesome. I just want to say B&B Hearts buying this book today. So that's awesome. There we go. Thank you. B&B Hearts 0425. I just want to shout out to that. And he's excited to go, he or she is excited to go to the Light Cellar. I love that when it's good quality chocolate, you don't need a whole huge bar of chocolate to satisfy you. It's just so, if it's good quality, you just need a little amount and then you're satisfied, right? That's like Whole Foods 101. If you're eating quality whole foods, you don't need as much as you were to need if you were to eat, poor quality processed foods.
Totally. So now I'm going to share that there's a whole section in this book, which might seem like, really, you put that in the book? I put in a whole section of actually how to eat chocolate, how to actually truly taste chocolate. And you might think, wow, I don't need help with that. I could certainly eat a chocolate bar. But this gets you into the idea of chocolate tasting, and to really becoming a connoisseur and diving into the flavors, because it's actually a real art form. So just as complex as chocolate is on a nutritional perspective, it is also on a flavor perspective. So it actually has 3 times more flavor compounds than wine. And we know how deep and how far you can take, wine tasting, becoming this kind of sommelier. You can absolutely do that with good quality chocolate as well, and to really get into the depths of flavor.
Can you give just like one out of the tips that you give in the book to appreciate the taste of chocolate and get a deeper understanding of it? Can you just give one tip so that people could even try at home with the chocolate that they have and see if it makes a difference in flavor?
For sure. So, and it's just mindfulness, just becoming aware that you can even have this experience with chocolate, and that depending on the types of chocolate, there are kind of stages to the flavor. So there's that initial first, front note, and then there's a mid note, and then there's a back note, and, just bite by bite, piece by piece, you can really just kind of ride that wave. And, we put in a flavor wheel into the book just to kind of help guide your palate to see if you can pick up some of these different flavors. So, here's an example of a chocolate flavor wheel. And so you want to start kind of at the center and look for things like, okay, am I tasting something that's more floral, or is it something more fruity, or is it nutty, or is it roasted, or is it more kind of am I picking up on the sweetness, like caramel type notes, or is it spicy? Is it earthy? And once you have identified those larger taste categories, then you can kind of dive in. Okay, so from fruity, is it actually more kind of stone fruit, like apricot, or is it a little bit more like, raisin and a dried fruit, or is it berry, or is it more citrus? And really begin to explore it. Nutty, of course, is it more almond? Is it more hazelnut? Is it more peanut? Floral, is it rose? Is it vanilla? Is it, there's a whole spectrum of flavor.
Similar to coffee, eh? Like the
Yeah.
flavor profile. I was a barista for a really long time, and it's just reminding me of how I used to have to think about coffee in the profile. Before we keep going, Zentex is asking, can your book be bought on Amazon?
Not yet.
Get into all the book, where you can buy, where it's from, and all of that. But just a quick question: Can you get it on Amazon yet?
Yeah, not yet. So my first book, Elixir Life, is on Amazon. And this one is still so new. I just haven't even uploaded it yet. So eventually you will, but currently it's just directly from Lightcellar. So one can order online, or if you're in Calgary, then come in person.
And then you will be selling it as an ebook as well, I'm assuming?
Yeah, 100%. So, through lightcellar.ca, you can buy the physical book, or you can buy the ebook.
Okay, awesome. One of my other really important questions I wanted to ask was what to look for when buying chocolate. I want people to start being really conscious and aware of, yes, you may be spending a little more, but you'll be eating a little less because it's so quality, and you'll be giving back to all of those amazing cacao farmers and the producers and all of that. Can you share, what do we look for in good quality chocolate, and what we should be looking for when we buy chocolate?
Yeah, great question. So I think number one is we want to look for that it's a small maker. And, chocolate can be defined, comes from 2 different worlds. We've got craft and we have commodity. Now, we all know commodity, right? When something is just reduced to literally kind of its price per pound kind of a thing, traded on the open market, through the stock market, that kind of a thing. Anything that becomes a commodity, unfortunately, it's just a race to the bottom in terms of how to make it as cheap as possible. And the quality really, really goes down. Now, the flip side to that is the world of craft, right? So it's all about small scale. It's about doing everything is intentionally as possible, as beautifully as possible, all the way, like you said, from sourcing the beans to honoring the farmers, you typically highlighting the origin. So it may or may not say craft chocolate, but you can tell, right? What's the story behind this company? And, I would argue that all of our foods, we should be, looking to that kind of small scale. And there is that resurgence with, the craft, the artisan, farm direct, that type of thing. That's where the quality's at. And chocolate is no different. And that has increased massively in the last, 10, 15 years. Like when I first started making chocolate, I was one of 3 chocolate makers in Canada. That was it. We were the only ones making chocolate from scratch. Even some of the most well-known, well-loved bars are actually chocolatiers. Now, I don't want to put down a chocolatier, but there is a distinction between a chocolate maker, someone who makes the chocolate from scratch, and someone who actually buys pre-made chocolate, typically from this large international conglomerate like Barry Callebaut or Cargill Foods is actually one of the biggest chocolate makers in the world.
Cargill?
Yeah. Yeah. They've got a whole kind of section of their business where they're making this kind of bulk chocolate. Barry Callebaut is the largest, but that's commodity chocolate, right? It gets bought and sold in the big international market, melted down, and even kind of what might seem like a small artisan maker, they'll just melt it down, put it in their own molds and wrappers. So look for craft, or what could be described as bean to bar. This is where people are really, again, dialing into those details and making something totally different. And if it says fair trade, that's not the be all end all. Direct trade can often be even better. So, if they're highlighting, the area, the region, the origin, that can be also a clue. Unfortunately, there's no kind of gold stamp of like, just buy this type of chocolate and you're all good. So it does take a little bit more sleuthing and a little bit more digging, and just, beginning to become aware of the industry and different makers, and, learning their story.
Yeah, so direct trade versus fair trade, just so people understand, direct trade is you're buying literally from the farmers, right? That are harvesting the pods and turning it into cacao beans. And so they get all of the money that you are buying the cacao from. So there's no third person, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And because cacao farmers are, like many other farmers, are paid terribly if it's not direct trade. It's like I go to my farmers down the street and they get all of the money that I'm giving them to buy my vegetables. It's the same for cacao. So if you can buy that, it's much better for the producer, right?
Yeah, no, you got it. Absolutely.
Okay. What other questions? Is there anything that you specifically want to talk about instead of me? I want to talk, I don't know how much longer you want to go with this, but if anyone has any questions, please put it in the comments. I'm trying to book through those, but maybe we should talk about, your book just a little bit more, and again, share with people where people can get it, and where we'll eventually be able to get it as well.
Yeah.
You just let us know what you feel we need to know, Malcolm.
All right, for sure. So this is my second book I've written. The first one was called Elixir Life. It's all about kind of beverages, superfoods, herbs, modern nutrition meets ancient herbal wisdom. And I've been working on Chocolate Life for a number of years, and excited that it's finally out. And the goal here was, I literally had to cut this in by down to a third of the original volume, because I had way too much in there. I was nerded out. My editor's like, basically you just put everything you ever possibly could know about chocolate into a book. I guess so. That's where I started. But what was most relevant, right? So there is some of that nutrition. There is kind of the tasting. There's that whole story of how chocolate comes to be from plant to pod to fruit to fermentation to bar, and then it is primarily a recipe book. So there's over 30 different recipes in here. with that, nutritional perspective and angle of how do we make chocolate not only the best quality ever, but this delivery system for other superfoods and herbs and all the different forms that we know and enjoy, be they bars, fudge, sauces, milks, drinks, you name it. And so it's currently just.
I wanted to try the quinoa cake, by the way. It looks delicious. And I do love, as a person that really is conscious of the amount of refined sugar and just sugar in general that I consume, and in my personal recipes, when I was going through your recipes, it's not a ton of sugar, and you don't use refined sugar. You offer so many other alternatives to using refined sugar in order to give that little bit of sweetness to the chocolate. So I personally really appreciate that part because it makes me want to use those recipes.
Yeah, awesome. That was the whole goal, right? Because, when I started my journey, getting into food nutrition, getting into whole foods, that kind of a thing, I was a closet chocoholic because I love chocolate, but yet I didn't know that it could be any other way, right? There I was, like, I don't eat white sugar, but I ate candy bars because, that was the only access I had. If I was going to eat chocolate, like, I just had to, accept that it had white sugar in it until I realized I could make it myself, from scratch. And then I could choose not only what type, but then how much I put in there. So a friend of mine, his mother has diabetes and, she struggled with that for years. She loves chocolate. And granted, today on the market, there's lots of options. But again, a lot of them are kind of these weird, maltitol, visitol, erythritol, like kind of alcohol-based sugars, and not the best option, and not something that she was stoked on. So he learned how to create his own chocolate, and now, he's the favorite son, right? Because he makes it for her, right to her taste, and in a way that works with her blood sugar.
I love that. Someone's asking, do you teach classes, Malcolm?
Yeah, 100% for sure. So, I've probably taught thousands of people how to be their own chocolate maker over the last, 10, 15 years. And that's something that I do on the regular. And over these last 2 years, I've really kind of stepped up and figure out how to do online. So every class we do now, there's in-person component where those are in the Calgary area, like, come on down, come into the kitchen, taste, enjoy, connect, learn. And then if you're not able to make it, then we do also have it online as well. So there are in-person and online components to all the classes that we teach. So all that is through lightcellar.ca. You just hit the classes and event tab. And it's not just chocolate, it's elixirs, it's fermentation, it's medicinal mushrooms. There's a whole lot that we offer.
Yeah, you definitely do, and so authentic and so true. So I can't speak enough. If I was living in Calgary, I would be there often as well, probably trying to get a job from you or something.
We'd have you teaching.
To finish this off, one thing, I remember my first time actually in your, when you started the Light Cellar. I don't think you're where you are when you first started, is that right? You moved, okay. So your first Light Cellar store, and I tried just a simple dark chocolate that you made. Like, you just took it out of the fridge, because I was teaching a class there or something. And you're like, hey, try this. And I'm like, I'm not a fan of chocolate, really. It's not my thing. And I remember trying real, like, homemade chocolate from Cacao. And it was so smooth. That's like the biggest thing I remember. There was no acidity like you can get from chocolate. It didn't like sit at the back of my tongue. I'm a chef, if not everybody understands this. So like everything is very, I taste everything on a much higher level and hear everything and smell everything. So when I taste it, I was like, whoa, like I have never tasted such a smooth tasting chocolate. So if you go to Malcolm's online chocolate classes or like live classes, or even just get his book and learn how to make it yourself, you will be shocked. It's not very difficult, is it, Malcolm?
No, we're literally talking 3 ingredients as the base. And as you kind of highlighted, everything I try and do, I make interchangeable. So even though there's only 3 ingredients to every single chocolate bar as a base, even those 3 ingredients, like, oh, well, I don't have cacao butter. Oh, great, you can use this. Oh, okay, what type of sweetener? You can use this. So each of them can be interchanged out. And then that's your base, right? To create a chocolate, which can also be a sauce and so on and so forth. And then what else do you add to it, right? Great. If you want like a milk chocolate, here's how you add that in. If you want peppermint, if you want medicinal mushroom, if you want this, if you want that, then you can kind of add and build on that base.
And okay, so if you're in the Calgary area, you can buy all of those ingredients that they would need there at the Light Cellar, right?
Yeah, we got chocolate making kits available, and as with most things, when you make it yourself, you save, right? Not only are you able to customize it to your own tastes and palate, but you can also save money doing it too. So I've done the math on this. It's been quite a while, but let me just try and think. So I think it's like one of our kits is $22, and then that gets you enough to do 1.5 pounds of chocolate.
Well, of quality chocolate.
Yeah.
Quality chocolate. So.
Yeah, and totally good. Yeah, Be Hearts there. Make it with the kids. This is it. It's a fun activity. Even for those that maybe don't like being in the kitchen or associate with being chefs. No, this is for everybody.
I love it. Okay. Anything else? Where can they find you? Actually, one more thing. So for people that don't live in Calgary, that can't get your amazing quality products, is there anything you would recommend for people if they're on Vancouver Island right now, if they're in Mexico? Well, Mexico's easy to find chocolate paste, no problem, but can you recommend if they wanted to make their own chocolate, do you have any other recommendations on how they can get some quality ingredients?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we ship all over Canada. That's our primary market. We do get folks from the States occasionally. It's not something we focus on, but if someone does order, then we can work that way. But most quality health food stores will have these types of ingredients. As I mentioned, chocolate industry and cacao, it's a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of having a stamp of okay, this means quality. Typically it might say raw. We didn't get too much into that, but that's actually a bit of a misnomer. By the strict definition of what is raw, cacao is not that. Because of the fermentation process that it goes through, it goes above those quote unquote raw temperatures. But it's good enough to kind of as a lead, as a way to kind of suggest, okay, what is maybe less processed or minimally processed and going to have the highest amount of nutrition. So that can always be a helpful terminology. Eventually, we'll move beyond that. I talk about that in the book and just kind of clarify that term. But for now, it's the best we have.
We really only got to the surface of all of the information in this book. So and we only have so much time together and don't want to keep everybody too much longer. So please, I highly recommend this book if you want to nerd out on chocolate. And it's not even just for chocolate. For me, after I read it, it was just, again, a new appreciation for the synergy of food and how it actually works in our body. And just to another curiosity of where does our food come from? How does this happen? And how does it get on our plate? I love knowing all of that. I think many people that follow me and many people that follow you have that same curiosity of where does our food come from? How is it grown? Who takes care of our food before it comes to us? So I can't recommend this book more, Chocolate Life. And Malcolm, please tell everyone where they can find you, and we'll do this again, I'm sure, for something else.
Yeah, right on. It's been a joy, and thanks for everybody that tuned in to the live here this morning. So you can connect with me further, Light Cellar. If you're on Instagram and you're on the live stream, just click Light Cellar. You can give me a follow, and then the website lightcellar.ca. That's where you can get the book. That's where you can get some of the products we've been talking about, as well as access to the classes, both live as well as recorded ones as well.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
I think ended on this. We did it in 5 minutes, less than an hour. So way to go.
Right on. Well, appreciate you having me on and having a great chat tonight. That was good.